Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'd like to introduce you to Hillel Cooperman from Oracle. Hillel, good morning.
Hi.
Morning.
I'm actually from Seattle.
And Microsoft.
I work at Oracle. I'm just
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going?
Hillel, I have read a couple of things that you've written. I've looked at a couple of your talks, and the one thing that strikes me from the beginning is you really enjoy what you're doing. Take a couple minutes and tell us about your job.
Sure. I'm glad that comes across. I do. I live in perennial fear of how short life is, so I try to choose activities that I enjoy. I take care of design, user experience design at Oracle. I do it in partnership with a close friend of mine who we've worked together almost 20 years, worked together at Microsoft. And she runs design for brand and marketing, and I run it for the user interface, and together we take care of it for the whole company. And essentially, you know, before I went to work there, I didn't really know much about Oracle, what it did. I knew about the database, but I didn't realize that Oracle had all this software that people spend a lot of time using all day, like, you know, talking directly to that software, using, it's some infrastructure piece, but they're interacting directly with it. And there's, you know, these folks, they don't get a choice often. It's not like, oh, do you want to use Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook? You can choose to use none, all, one or the other, whatever you want. It's not like the consumer space and the enterprise space, like somebody with a fancy title decides, and then they have to use it. And so to me, getting to do creative work to be an advocate for people who don't always get a choice, to make the tools that they have to use every day really a positive experience. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, and you travel a lot.
I travel some, not tons, but we've been sort of heads down for the last 18 months working on this new design system, and then now I'm going to be traveling more, kind of sharing it with the rest of the company and getting the word out.
Well, before we talk about enterprise software, you, in one of your talks, you talked about going to London. And when I was in my business, I really didn't like doing expense reports. That was always a nuisance to me. And you talk about going to London and pulling up your system on your phone. And there's a little red box down in the bottom right-hand side. And you hit that, and this whole proactive experience begins, where it starts prompting you. And well, first of all, you've used your corporate credit card. It grabs all the data, so it knows how much you paid for that, and it has your hotel reservation. Maybe it pulls that in as well. But it's this proactive experience with a smart bot that kind of stays with you and learns with you as it spends more time with you. And it puts the expense report together for you.
Yeah.
Oh, so I want that.
Awesome, we're working on it. I guess I would say, you know, it's funny, like, I tend to worry about both kind of the heart and the mind for all the people that interact with anything we make or anything I ever make. And so I think there's sort of the functional need and there's the emotional need, right? Or the right brain and the left brain, however you want to say it. And in terms of expenses, it's funny because no one wants to do expenses, ever. Like no one here woke up in the morning and was like, ooh, so excited to file some expenses today. It's just not, that's not a thing that happens, ever. In fact, if you did know someone like that, you probably would not invite them to your party, I'm guessing. And so you know, in order to, and this is just true for design in general, I don't think it's unique to software, but I think that especially, like design is just being intentional and thoughtful about solving a bunch of problems for human beings that, you know, may seem tricky or may have kind of tensions in all the things that are driving the challenge. And with expenses, it's funny, this gets to kind of the heart of where we always start with design. So I said to folks on my team, like, well, what's the problem for the user with expenses? They're like, oh, it's too many clicks. Or then they would say, oh, well, you have to, too many fields you got to fill out, or it's too slow, or all this. I'm like, none of those are the problem. Those may be improvements, they may be challenges in the technology, but those aren't the problem. The actual problem is I spent money for work and I want it back. Like, that's it. There's no technology involved there, there's no software involved there, there's no nothing. And so as soon as you start thinking about the problem in terms of that sort of base need, then all of a sudden I think it reveals novel ways to solve things, which in the way you described is, in the solution that we came up with that you described, the novelty is to get rid of the user experience, to get rid of the user interface, and to just do it automatically, because nobody wants to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So my thoughts on enterprise software from the old days. The company has made a decision for me. This is the software I'm going to use. It's one size fits all. Here's all the pieces. Here's the user experience, and live well, prosper, go. And it's not that way, because from what I can tell from looking online, you choose the pieces that you want, and you define the interface the way you want it, and then depending upon your needs, if you want to communicate with people in your organization, or if, whatever you want to do, it's sort of there for you to use and to define based on the way you want to work.
Yeah, totally. I think that's right on. I'd take it even a step further. Like, I think that you guys have been. There's been a lot of AI discussion here. I even had some breakfast.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, bless you. I think that beyond even you being able to customize technology for your needs, I think that the technology should adapt to you automatically, right? And so we have an enormous amount of data that the system can tell what you do, who you interact with, what you have permissions to do, what your role is, what tasks are relevant to you and which ones aren't. And not just in sort of a static fashion, but in an ongoing fashion. Like, you may be someone who works and has to submit time cards every Friday at 5.
Right.
And Friday at 4:45, maybe the first option is, hey, it's time to submit your time card. Or it may be annual review time, or the company picnic may be happening, or it may be time for you to fill out this survey on how people are doing at work, or whatever it happens to be. There's all these things that are based on your role and based on the context in which your role or your location that we can use to really create a personalized experience for people that makes them feel, and actually, not to go on and on, but when I think about kind of why I care about this and kind of what my dream is about what will happen when we do a good job, love to delight people, love when people are like, oh, that's really useful, love when people are like, oh, that's beautiful, oh, that was easy to use, that's all good. But the thing that I get the most joy out of, the thing that I'm really always going for, is when someone uses something that I had a small role in making and says, oh, you get me.
Right.
That they feel understood because we did a good job listening. Not because we were so smart, not because we were geniuses, not because we came up with some brilliant innovation. That's all great, right? If possible. I'm not saying I'm one of those, but all good stuff. But when you can deliver something to someone, and this is not, I'm not talking just about software or technology or enterprise software or anything, just in general, and they feel heard and understood, like, I think that's the way you connect with other people, and I think that's the way you create meaningful relationships.
You have 130,000 employees, and you use the product extensively.
Not me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have 130,000 employees. Yeah.
But
yes, we use the software ourselves. When I was at Microsoft, we called it dog fooding, eating your own dog food. But one of my buddies at Oracle is like, that's gross. Can we call it drinking our own champagne? I'm like, that's fine too.
Yeah.
So yeah, we use it ourselves.
Okay, so you bang on it pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really important I think it's both important to not get confused that you all have the same challenges as your customer, but I do think it's important to live in their universe as much as possible.
Right. What is an autonomous database?
So, good question. An autonomous database is one that takes care of a bunch of functions that used to be handled by administrators, by human beings, and does them automatically to reduce human error and reduce cost. It's like whether it's configuration or tuning or performance setting or scaling, security, patching, all these kind of things. That's what autonomous means in this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about this new way of doing business, this new way of providing enterprise software.
Yeah, sure. There was, you guys probably know this story, but Ford was the #1 car company in the world in the 20s and I think up until the early 30s. And pretty soon I'm going to say 20s and you'll be like, which century?
Boy, that's tough.
General Motors came along and was the scrappy competitor. And Henry Ford famously, he said, you can have a Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. And GM came along and decided to bring design and aesthetics to cars. And up until we had electric cars and self-driving cars, cars hadn't really changed since the 1930s. I mean, they did, but they really didn't. There were, maybe more cup holders, electric windows, stuff like that, but nothing that was fundamentally disruptive to what a car did. And when GM came along, and they, it's fascinating, actually, this story. The folks who ran what they did was they would basically take the same car every year, but then every couple of years they changed the shell of it, just the clothes it wore basically. But the fundamental engineering of the car hadn't changed, but it felt new. And even in GM, they called that, in this sort of sexist fashion, the lipstick department, right? They'll just paint some superficial. It's not really the thing that matters, right? It's sort of a way of denigrating the work that the design team did. But they did it, and GM became the #1 car company in the world, and for decades and decades and decades, never looked back, and Ford never reclaimed that title, ever. And I think that industries, are often built on this initial disruption, right? Going from horse-drawn carriages to cars. But then after that moment, as they start to mature and they start to understand that the benefit of the disruption is no longer enough to differentiate the product, that design is where companies can start to mature and have a deep understanding of what their customers need and deep understanding of humanity, right? And in the technology industry, so many people are, so many of us are engineers, and we're very, in this room actually people are probably pretty much a balance, but at least in the industry there's a lot of left brain folks who are all about, speeds and feeds, the numbers, the functions, does it do this, does it do it faster, does it do, et cetera. But the softer stuff that's harder to measure, things like, well, how this product or service or this thing I made makes someone feel, it's mushy, it's scary, it's emotional, it's touchy-feely. And I think it's really important. I think that we're human beings, and I think that thinking that all we care about is how something functions and not how it makes us feel is naive. What car do you drive?
I drive a Mustang.
A Mustang. Okay, now if I took your Mustang, all the same, muscle of it and the power of it and the acceleration of it, but I wrapped it not in a beautiful, sleek American muscle Mustang silhouette, but I wrapped it in like a Do you know what a Pontiac Aztek is?
Yes, I do. I do.
This is the car that Walt drove in Breaking Bad. It's like a.
Yeah.
I apologize if anyone in here had anything to do with a Pontiac Aztek. What's that?
Camping on wheels.
Yeah, it looks like a shoe, I guess. It reminds me of like a platypus. Is it a mammal? Is it a reptile? What is this thing? I don't know. It is terribly ugly.
I would not be happy driving.
But
an
why?
Aztek.
It does the exact same thing, John. What's the big deal?
Why? It's just-
But this to me is this question. I ask this question because even people who find themselves to consider themselves the most rational and the most that lipstick, that touchy-feely stuff, like they give a shit, like deeply about like, no, I bought this car for a reason because, and when you get at it, all of a sudden they have to examine like, well, why? Why do I care that my Mustang doesn't look like a Pontiac Aztek, but looks like a Mustang because it's a fashion statement. And all these things, even those of us who are like, oh, I'm not into all that, I don't buy it really. It may be hard to acknowledge. We may not be as in touch with that side of ourselves, but like it's normal, it's human. I remember when I worked at Microsoft, we used to, I would talk to the Office team, and I was on the Windows team, and we would have healthy debates. And and they would say, oh, well, you're doing stuff for people at home. We're doing stuff for people at work. It's totally different. And I'm just like, they're human beings. They go home at night. They are the very same people. Like, I don't know why they wouldn't want a delightful experience 24/7. Like, they didn't suddenly want something, less emotionally resonant just because they're at their job. I mean, work appropriate, sure, but still delightful, resonant, I think. Do you want to, I could just show you
I'd like to see some.
So again, let me just plant a seed here. Software is at that moment, technology in general, I think, or high tech, is at that place, I think, in the 30s where Ford passed the baton unwillingly, I would imagine, to GM. And in some ways, enterprise software is the tail of that evolution. My fellow designers, they want to work on shiny, like Instagram, and I work at Facebook, or they're working on consumer stuff, and I've done all that. But some of us are really excited about working, and this is not a diss on some of the more consumer-oriented scenarios, but we get really attracted to really complex scenarios. Like I want to model how I'm going to get trucks to deliver parts from all over the continent to factories at the right time to build all the things I need to build to fulfill my orders within the right amount of time, and to visualize that on a map, and just really cool. It looks like NORAD in there, huge screens, and just really cool design challenges. And so in some ways, as the high-tech design discipline has matured, it has been a perfect marriage with some of the more complex enterprise scenarios, where it used to be that designers didn't want to work on enterprise stuff, or some of the best ones didn't want to work on it, not all, but some, because it's not cool or flashy or hip. What will I tell my friends that they won't be using my software necessarily. But now it turns out that there's this beautiful marriage of enterprise software and really mature, talented, not talking about me, design leaders who Jenny and I managed to convince to come to Oracle and really bring this software not just into the modern age, but kind of hopefully a leap ahead. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to show you just a little clip, a highlight reel. It's like barely over a minute of what Oracle software is going to look like going forward and how it's going to feel. And this is, just so you know, we make software that does all the sort of things that every business does. Manage people, human resources, manage money and inventory, enterprise resource planning. We got a lot of good, very lofty acronyms for this stuff. We have supply chain and manufacturing and procurement and public sector software, cities, counties, governments, managing planning. And so, this is just a little taste of it, but you'll get it, you'll get a sense. I'll stop talking and we'll dive in here. Oh yeah, and this new design we call Redwood. Redwood is, Oracle's located in Redwood City. Redwoods are these beautiful, organic wonders of the earth. They have this is actually kind of cool, I didn't know this. Redwood roots are actually relatively shallow, but they connect with roots from other trees, other redwoods, and they support each other, which I just thought was sweet. And also Redwood, reaches up into the cloud, where our software is. Ha, ha, ha. So a lot of conceptual density there. All right, sorry, I don't need your sympathy laughter. If it's not funny, don't laugh. I just need to learn not to make stupid jokes.
Okay, so we said the word AI, we said the word cloud, and we said the word autonomous.
Bingo.
Okay.
We got it. Buzzword bingo. Okay. So anyway, so here if you hit the volume a little bit, here's just a quick sense of what we just announced a couple weeks ago and what Oracle's going to look like. There's that red button, yeah. Thanks. So, and the cool thing is, and I know we want to leave a minute for questions, so I'll just wrap up with this thought. For one, I love companies where they understand that design is just a vessel or a methodology or a process or a vehicle for telling a story. And that they understand that every single interaction that they have as a company with the rest of us who don't work there, and even with the people that work there, tells a story. And it can be intentional and thoughtful, or it can not be intentional or thoughtful. So companies like Disney, companies like IKEA, Starbucks, Apple, like every single interaction you have with them, not just in the software, physical interaction, digital interaction with the product or the service they sell, with the people who work there, with the marketing, with their events, whatever it is, every one of those is an opportunity to tell their story. And there are so many companies that look at these as either totally separate and siloed, discrete things, or they don't even realize kind of the emotional money they're leaving on the table when they aren't intentional about how they tell that story. And I've only been at Oracle 18 months, and I've been pretty blown away by how receptive everybody was to us not just redesigning the software, but redesigning the whole company, right? And this is outward-facing, inward-facing for employees, physical, digital, open world. We totally redesigned the whole experience. It's been quite gratifying in that regard, and it's just rare that you get a $200 billion company that's a tech icon of more than 4 decades that lets you kind of waltz in there and you say, hey, can we redesign everything? And they're like, yeah, sure, go for it. Like that just doesn't happen. So I in some ways feel like the stars have aligned and I got deeply lucky. My partner in crime, Jenny, and I got deeply lucky in being there to do this. So we're kind of having a bit of an adventure. So with that, should we take
We'd love to take your questions.
If there are any.
If there are any questions. While we're waiting for a question, do you really have 500, 600, 700 pounds of Legos?
It's probably more than that.
Yeah.
I can't count, but I think it's over 250,000 bricks.
Yeah.
Think of it as like a sculpture, right? It's just an art form. And you start out thinking that if you just buy a bunch of Lego, you can build anything you want, but that's it's not true, because invariably you need a lot of parts that you don't have, because there's
we have a question.
6,000 to 8,000 different parts, et cetera. But yeah, I got a whole Lego studio.
And you do not let your kids play with your Legos?
No, that's not for kids.
Good.
Yeah.
Question?
Well, first of all, now that I have to change my question, of course you have to let your kids play with your Lego, because in my studio, that's where some of the most exciting things happen, when they put things together I hadn't possibly imagined. So I was delighted when you talked about how you have to move beyond the visible measurement of what you're doing and making sure that the software really does put users in the center. If you were to say one thing that you need to think about as a designer to ensure that happens every day, what would that thing be?
Yeah, I think it's really about having a deep, and sorry, I don't mean to repeat myself, but having a deep and nuanced understanding of what the challenges that the user is facing, not in how they use the technology, but like why they're even looking at the technology in the first place. What are they trying to accomplish in their life?
We have another question right over here.
Thomas Curran. Just as a curiosity for me, when I worked at SAP in the 90s, we could reach about, I think it was 4 or 5% of the actual people working in companies installed in software, and I think that's obviously through acquisitions of new products, and it's grown a lot. But what's your view on, the effect of your software on enterprises today when you have a completely different model of interaction? I mean, to some extent, all the things you just said are very appealing, but does anyone really use Oracle in the companies in that significant way that it would make a big difference? So that's, I think that's just to put a perspective on how companies like Salesforce or Google or Apple are affecting businesses today in a much different way than they were in the heyday of enterprise software.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question to ask, companies buy technology, but does it get used? And I think for better or for worse, a lot of the use cases that we worry about are things that they have to use. And I'll give you an example. We make ERP software, financial software. They're going to have a general ledger. They're going to have accounts payable. They're going to have invoices. They're going to have payroll. The company doesn't function without those things, so they have to use that stuff. What is important to me is that we don't use that as a crutch for not doing a great job, making sure that it's not just something they have to use, but something they want to use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was trying to just set the stage for why you're doing this today versus 10 years ago, where today you just had travel expense reporting, which is something that does affect a lot of the customers.
Yeah.
And I think as enterprise software has grown, maybe the next generation won't be as different from Microsoft Office as it was maybe 10 years ago. So I think that's a very important model to explain to CIOs and people in big businesses that enterprise is something different from Office or productivity, so-called productivity software.
Got it. Cool, thanks.
We have 30 seconds. There's a quick question. Anyone?
When you do the smart software that tries to adapt to the user, how do you make sure that you get that right and you aren't annoying because you weren't close enough and you're actually getting in the way of what they need to do? Because right now wasn't the minute I needed to answer the employee survey.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
We only have 10 seconds or so.
You try things, and then if the user doesn't respond, then gee, maybe I didn't get it right. And so as much as I love asking customers what they want, how they feel, I much prefer to rely even more on seeing what they actually do. And then we know, even if they say, oh yeah, that would be great, but they don't actually click on it, then I'm like, I don't know if it's so great. It might be a distraction. Does that make sense?
Hillel, Cooperman, Oracle. Thank you.
Thanks so much.